electric vehicles, are they, truly clean? Or are we just sort of shifting the pollution around? Because over their entire lifetime, electric vehicles are undeniably cleaner than traditional internal combustion engine vehicles.
Right.
I mean, the data makes this completely clear. Even if the electricity used to charge them comes from the absolute dirtiest fossil fuels on the grid, they still come out ahead in the long run.
Okay, but we can't just ignore the raw facts of the production side. I mean, the upfront environmental toll of battery manufacturing is massive.
Yeah.
It's heavily polluting, it requires staggering amounts of raw earth, and it leaves us with this looming, highly dangerous waste crisis for the future that, frankly, we are currently entirely unprepared to handle.
So as you're listening to this deep dive into the source material right now, I want you to think about this. When you look at an electric car, do you see a green savior, or do you see a hidden ecological debt?
And to truly understand that debt, we have to dissect the immense upfront cost of building one of these machines.
Right.
Based on life cycle assessments from multiple environmental agencies. Producing an electric vehicle requires significantly more raw natural resources and generates vastly more industrial waste than producing a standard gas-powered car.
Because of the battery.
Exactly. I mean, everyone knows that batteries require mining, but what most people don't realize is the sheer devastating scale of that extraction. Take lithium, for example. A primary extraction method is brine mining.
Which isn't just like digging a hole in the ground.
No, it's a completely different mechanism. Brine mining involves pumping subterranean salt water from deep underground all the way up to the surface and filling these colossal, artificially constructed evaporation pools.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then you just let the sun evaporate the water over many months, leaving behind the concentrated salts. But the real problem here is the water displacement.
Because it's a desert environment, usually.
Right. Doing this drains vast, unsustainable amounts of fresh water from the surrounding ecosystems. It completely dries out local water tables.
Unbelievable.
So you have surrounding indigenous communities and farmers who suddenly find their ancestral agricultural lands turning to dust, just because the subterranean water they rely on has been pumped out to make a battery.
And the raw data indicates it isn't just water displacement we have to worry about with the mining.
Far from it. When you look at cobalt mining, which is another crucial component for the stability of these chemical batteries, the extraction process is tied to severe habitat destruction and heavy pollution.
Yeah, the cobalt data is rough.
It really is. To get cobalt, you have to pulverize rock. And this creates a massive amount of highly toxic dust. We are talking about microscopic particulates of heavy metals that just coat the surrounding landscapes.
Which obviously affects the people living there.
Exactly. It causes severe respiratory issues for surrounding communities. And then, when it rains, those heavy metals leach directly into the groundwater.
Right.
And on top of all the mining, you also have to look at the chassis of the car itself. The sheer volume of aluminum used to keep electric vehicles as light as possible creates a massive spike in greenhouse gas emissions.
Wait, I want to pause you right there. Why does aluminum cause a greenhouse gas spike? I mean, I thought it was just a standard lightweight metal.
Well, it's because of the smelting process. To turn raw bauxite dirt into pure aluminum, you have to apply an immense amount of electrical current.
Okay.
It requires a staggering amount of energy. And in many of the countries where this smelting actually takes place, that electricity is generated by burning coal.
Wow.
So before the car's even driven a single mile, before it even reaches the dealership lot, the act of manufacturing its battery and its frame has pumped a massive volume of carbon into the atmosphere. We are talking about a highly intensive, highly toxic start to the life of a vehicle.
I hear that, and I am not denying that this carbon and resource debt exists. The manufacturing footprint is exceptionally heavy. But I have to challenge the premise that this invalidates the clean energy argument because, well, here is where the data gets incredibly compelling.
Okay, let's hear it.
That upfront debt is a short-term deficit. Using data from national laboratories, we can look at what is called the break-even point.
The point where the emissions essentially balance out.
Exactly. Let's think about this like housing. Buying a traditional gas-powered car is like paying rent. Every single time you turn the key, you're burning fuel, emitting tailpipe pollution, and paying environmental rent.
You're just constantly consuming.
Right. You never build ecological equity. You just keep polluting forever. An electric vehicle, on the other hand, is like taking out a mortgage. On day one, you take on a massive environmental debt.
The localized pollution, the carbon from the aluminum smelting.
It is a huge upfront deficit, yes. But every single mile you drive without a tailpipe, you are paying down the principal on that mortgage.
But how long does that actually take? Because if the power grid charging the car is dirty, aren't you just replacing a small gas engine with a giant coal furnace miles away?
See, that is the most common argument, but the data actually proves otherwise. The break-even point still happens. A giant centralized power plant, even a coal plant, is vastly more efficient at generating energy than a tiny, inefficient explosion happening inside a car engine.
Okay, so the scale makes it more efficient.
Exactly. The data shows that even if an electric vehicle is charged on a local power grid powered entirely by coal, it still reaches that break-even point and becomes cleaner overall than a gas car in just a relatively short period of driving.
Huh.
You still pay off the mortgage. And if you charge that exact same electric car on a cleaner grid powered by renewable energy, like wind or solar, that parity happens in a mere fraction of the time. From that point on, every subsequent mile driven is an environmental net positive.
Which forces us into a very uncomfortable ethical calculus. I mean, we are weighing immediate local destruction against long-term global mitigation.
Yeah, it's a tough balance.
So if you're listening to this, I want you to ask yourself, should we accept severe localized environmental damage in mining regions today, draining water tables and polluting local air, just to lower global greenhouse gases over the next decade?
That is the core tension of the manufacturing side. You cannot get something for nothing. But that massive mining debt we just talked about, it requires a massive weight of dense metals to build a battery pack.
It does.
And that creates an unavoidable physical reality. The cars become incredibly heavy, which actually changes the physics of how the car interacts with the road, and that introduces an entirely different pollution problem.
It absolutely does. We have to look at a very specific criticism found in the environmental data regarding the act of daily driving. Electric vehicles are significantly heavier than gas cars. They carry those massive, dense battery packs underneath the floorboards.
Right.
Basic physics tells us that heavier cars pushing down on the asphalt mean more friction against the road. And more friction leads to much greater tire wear.
And this brings us to particulate matter.
Yes. Particulate matter, or PM. We are talking about microscopic, jagged particles of pollution that basically just float in the air. In this case, it is pulverized rubber from the tires and tiny pieces of asphalt kicked up into the atmosphere.
And why is that so dangerous?
The issue with particulate matter is that it's small enough to bypass the natural filtration systems of our lungs and enter our bloodstream directly.
Oh, wow.
The argument laid out in the data is that because of this extra weight, electric vehicles might actually produce significantly more non-exhaust particulate matter pollution than gas cars. If the tires are degrading faster because of the heavy battery, we're just trading tailpipe smog for tire smog.
Wait, let me make sure I'm understanding your point here. Are you saying that by driving an electric vehicle, I might actually be making the immediate air quality in my city worse?
Yes.
Because that completely contradicts the entire marketing pitch for these cars. I mean, the whole point is clearing up city smog.
Well, if you look strictly at the friction of the tires against the road, yes. The heavier weight means the rubber degrades faster, which means more microplastics in the air.
Okay, it sounds completely logical when you first hear it, but the environmental protection reports actually completely debunk this myth.
How so?
You are only looking at half of the equation. To understand why electric cars are still a net positive for local air quality, we have to look at the mechanism of how these cars actually stop. They use something called regenerative braking,
Which fundamentally alters the friction dynamic.
It entirely changes it. Let's explain the mechanism for a second. In a normal gas car, when you want to stop, you press a pedal that forces mechanical clamps to squeeze down hard on metal brake rotors.
Just sheer physical friction.
Exactly. It uses sheer brute force friction to stop the wheels. That physical grinding turns the brake pads into fine toxic dust that gets thrown out into the city air. It is a massive source of urban particulate matter.
But an electric motor doesn't need to do that.
Right. Regenerative braking is a system that uses the electric motor's internal magnets to slow the car down. When you take your foot off the accelerator in an electric vehicle, the motor suddenly reverses its role.
Okay.
Instead of using electricity from the battery to spin the wheels, the forward momentum of the heavy car forces the wheels to spin the motor. The motor turns into a generator.
Oh, I see.
This creates intense magnetic resistance, which slows the car down smoothly while simultaneously shoving all of that recovered kinetic energy back into the battery to be used again.
So the physical brake pads are rarely even engaging.
Exactly.
Right.
Because the internal magnets are doing the heavy lifting to stop the car, the physical brake pads are almost entirely bypassed. As a result, brake wear in electric vehicles is practically non-existent.
That's fascinating.
You almost never have to replace them, which means they aren't grinding down and throwing toxic brake dust into the atmosphere. So let's look at the math. While it is undeniably true that the heavier weight of an electric car creates a slight increase in tire wear, the massive, almost total reduction in brake dust more than cancels it out.
Oh, wow.
When you add it all up, the total particulate pollution, which includes exhaust, plus tires, plus brakes, is actually significantly lower for electric vehicles than for gas cars.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it fundamentally changes how we view urban air quality. The reduction in brake dust is a massive, largely invisible benefit for city centers where stop-and-go traffic is a constant reality.
Exactly. So for you listening right now, imagine you're sitting in gridlock traffic. Did you ever stop to think that every time the car in front of you hits the brakes, they are physically grinding metal and directly contributing to the smog you are breathing in?
It is a profound realization about our daily environment. But, while the daily operation of these heavy vehicles might be cleaner for our lungs than we thought, that dense, heavy battery pack is not going to last forever.
Right. They eventually die.
Yeah, eventually the chemical cells degrade. They stop holding a sufficient charge. And that raises a critical question. We need to pivot to the future, focusing on the end-of-life crisis for these physical boxes of dense metals.
Okay.
If we look at case studies from rapidly adapting markets like Thailand, the forecast is deeply alarming.
You are talking about the looming battery tsunami.
That is precisely what the data outlines. Due to a rapid surge in adoption in just a short amount of time, an overwhelming volume of these battery packs will reach the end of their usable lifespan in vehicles.
And we just don't have the systems in place for it.
No, currently the infrastructure is severely lagging. Only a minuscule percentage of lithium-ion batteries globally are properly disposed of or recycled. The vast majority end up improperly discarded.
That's a huge problem.
But it isn't just about heavy metals sitting in landfills. The data highlights a terrifying immediate risk in disaster-prone areas, specifically flooded electric vehicles.
Right. As severe weather events increase, you have urban centers dealing with rising waters.
Think about a major urban flood. If you submerge a traditional gas car, the engine gets ruined. It's a financial loss, sure. But if the high-voltage batteries inside these electric vehicles are submerged in floodwaters for days at a time, the protective chemical seals holding the casing together can ultimately fail.
Which lets the water in.
Exactly. Water intrusion causes internal short circuits across the cells. This carries severe, immediate risks of electrocution for anyone nearby, especially for first responders wading through the water. But even more dangerously, it can trigger thermal runaway.
Let's clearly explain thermal runaway, because I think a lot of people just assume a battery fire is like a really intense gasoline fire.
It is fundamentally different and far more dangerous. Thermal runaway is an unstoppable, self-sustaining chemical reaction inside the battery. When the internal cells short-circuit or get damaged, the heat causes the internal components, specifically the cathode, to chemically break down.
Okay.
And here's the terrifying part. As the cathode breaks down under extreme heat, it releases its own oxygen.
So it is basically breathing itself.
Oh, exactly. A normal fire relies on oxygen from the surrounding air, which is why firefighters can smother it with a heavy blanket or chemical foam. You cannot smother a thermal runaway fire because the battery is generating its own oxygen from the inside out.
Oh, wow. That's terrifying.
It fuels its own combustion. It requires vast, overwhelming amounts of water just to cool the casing down enough to stop the chemical reaction.
Yeah.
And the most insidious part is that this reaction can be heavily delayed.
What do you mean delayed?
Well, a flooded car might look perfectly fine on the outside. It gets towed out of the water, sits in a dry tow yard for weeks, and then suddenly it spontaneously combusts because the internal corrosion finally triggered a short.
So leaving these compromised, high-voltage vehicles to informal scrapyards or local mechanics who completely lack specialized training and protective equipment is incredibly dangerous to the community.
It is essentially planting an invisible threat in residential areas. So I have to ask you, the listener, are you confident that your local infrastructure, your neighborhood mechanics, and your local fire departments are ready to safely dismantle high-voltage chemical boxes when the next major flood hits?
I admit the flooding and disposal risks are very real, and frankly, they highlight a major blind spot in the rush to adopt this technology. But I have to point out that the engineering data also maps out the solutions that are rapidly being developed to solve this exact end-of-life crisis.
We just to scale them.
We just have to scale them. The recycling technology is advancing incredibly fast. The answer is not a landfill, and it is not a traditional smelting furnace.
Because traditional smelting just burns everything away.
Right. The old way of recycling was just throwing the battery into a giant high-heat furnace. It required immense energy and basically burned off the lithium and the plastics, only leaving behind a few base metals.
Very inefficient.
It was incredibly wasteful. We are moving away from that and toward hydrometallurgy.
The liquid-based recycling method. But what makes it such a breakthrough?
It is all about separating the materials at a molecular level. Hydro means liquid. Instead of melting the battery, the facility safely discharges it, shreds it into pieces, and then submerges those pieces in highly specialized chemical solvents.
Right.
These solvents act specifically on the binding agents. They dissolve the glues and separate the pure elements inside the battery, like the lithium, the cobalt, the nickel. It uses a fraction of the energy compared to traditional smelting furnaces.
That's a massive improvement.
More importantly, it allows us to pull out those precious metals as highly purified powders or liquids. We can use those exact same purified metals to build brand new batteries.
So it bypasses the need to mine fresh materials altogether.
Exactly. It completely eliminates the need to go back to the brine pools or the cobalt mines. It creates a closed loop, and before a battery even reaches that chemical recycling bath, it can have a second life.
A second life.
Yeah. A battery that has degraded over many years might no longer be strong enough to rapidly accelerate a heavy car onto a highway, but it can still hold a significant amount of stationary electrical charge.
Oh, that makes sense.
These older batteries are increasingly being repurposed to store solar energy for individual homes or stacked together in shipping containers to stabilize the broader electrical grid when the wind isn't blowing.
Which is a brilliant engineering use of degraded capacity.
Mm-hmm.
It extends the timeline before disposal.
Oh.
But the technology only works if the batteries actually make it to those advanced hydrometallurgy facilities. How do we prevent them from just ending up in a scrapyard?
That is entirely a matter of policy. The data points heavily toward extended producer responsibility laws, or EPR.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
This is a legal framework that holds the original car manufacturers accountable for the entire life cycle of the battery. If governments implement strict laws forcing the companies that build the cars to track the batteries, take them back at the end of their life, and pay for the recycling, the waste crisis disappears.
Because they are forced to internalize the cost.
Yes. The dead battery transforms from a toxic liability into a highly valuable domestic resource.
That is the hurdle we have to clear. The technology exists, but the legal framework is lagging behind the manufacturing output.
So, what does this all mean? Let's summarize the knots we've just untangled. When you look at the raw data across the entire lifespan, electric vehicles are the clear winners in the long-term emissions marathon.
Right.
Because of mechanisms like regenerative braking and grid-scale efficiency, they objectively clean up our daily urban air and significantly reduce total global greenhouse gases.
But they do come with a hefty, dirty, upfront price tag paid by the local environments where the raw minerals are extracted. And they introduce a future disposal and disaster threat, particularly with thermal runaways and flood zones, that our current infrastructure is urgently struggling to keep up with.
I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder. Based on this closed-loop recycling data we just explored, if hydrometallurgy advances to the point where battery materials can be purified and reused infinitely without ever degrading, will the cars of the future no longer be seen as disposable consumer products, but rather as temporary vessels for infinitely immortal circulating energy materials?
See you next week.